Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Victor Radebe. I'm the founder of Mobility Center for Africa. We're grateful today to have a great lineup of speakers, and we invite you to join us in this session this morning. This is the session where we're going to be talking about smart mobility. We'll look at the area of sustainability as far as smart mobility is concerned. We've got a great lineup of speakers, great young people who are looking into taking mobility to the next era. Our first speaker is a fine young man in his 30s, Sasheen Rajkumar. He's a project engineer at SANRAL, a great company that is looking into innovating how we move from point A to point B. I've had the pleasure of working with SANRAL and particularly their innovation team in Cape Town and the Eastern region in KZN, where Mr. Rajkumar is based. As a future visionary leader, Sasheen is passionate about inspiring people and creating societal value by harnessing the power of technology and innovation. When developing solutions that will shape the future of our world, he believes that we need to challenge the status quo by first understanding why do we do what we do and how we do it. As a driver of smart mobility at SANRAL, he believes in democratizing mobility for everyone while supporting electric, connected, autonomous, and sustainable mobility. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Sasheen Rajkumar, project engineer from SANRAL. Over to you, Sasheen.
Thanks so much, Victor. And hi, everybody. Just gonna get my presentation loaded. So it's really great to be part of this conference. And I'm going to be sharing some thoughts and ideas on smart mobility, things that we've begun talking about at SANRAL, about what the future landscape of mobility may look like in South Africa, and also try to establish what role we can play as government in actively shaping the future. So there's 5 things you should know about me. I was born in 1990. I'm a huge fan of superhero movies. I'm really passionate about using technology and innovation to make the world a better place. I'm a big fan of Elon Musk and Tesla. And lastly, but most important, I'm led by Jesus in everything that I do. So I did say that I'm a fan of superhero movies. And I'd like to start my talk with a trailer from one of my all-time favorite movies, The Black Panther. So for the next 2 minutes, just sit back, relax, and enjoy.
I have seen gods fly. I've seen men build weapons that I couldn't even imagine. I've seen aliens drop from the sky. But I have never seen anything like this, which was wide open.
Oh yeah!
My son, it is your time.
Show me my respect and bow down.
You get to decide what kind of king you are going to be. Don't freeze.
I never freeze.
The revolution will not be televised. Show me my respect and bow down. We own ya. We own ya. We only getting started now. Cause we own ya. Everybody think they know me now. Cause we own ya. You and I'm on ya. Cause we own ya.
I waited my entire life for this. The world's gonna start over. I'ma burn it all. What happens now determines what happens to the rest of the world. You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. revolution will not be televised. Let's have some fun. The revolution will be live.
Wakanda forever, and welcome to the African Smart City Summit 2021. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I watch the trailer or movie, it gets my blood pumping. So I'm hoping that most of you are excited now. But I think some of you may be wondering, Sasheen, what does the Black Panther have to do with the summit? Well, I'll give you a few reasons. The first was to pay respect to the late Chadwick Boseman, who did an extraordinary job of playing King T'Challa. The movie was not only one of the highest grossing movies of all time, but it broke stereotypes of African nations. The world was in worship of Wakanda, a fictitious, technologically advanced, mineral-rich African nation that is ruled by King T'Challa, who is also the Black Panther, a Marvel comic superhero. And what I found most fascinating was the vision of Wakanda, a futuristic African smart city with advanced transportation technology. This included flying cars and magnetic levitation, or maglev trains, which are pictured here, which meant that they didn't need to build traditional asphalt and concrete roads. Gravel roads were fine. And that's leapfrog technology. The smart city of Wakanda and their technology was built using vibranium, a fictitious mineral with limitless power that was found only in their country. But Wakanda kept the mineral for themselves, harnessing its power and using it, enabling them to leapfrog the rest of the world, putting them at the pinnacle of advanced technology. Now, similarly, many natural resources and precious minerals found in Africa could be used to advance our nations. But in contrast, it seems that these resources only enrich people outside of Africa. Did you know that more than 50% of the world's cobalt reserves are found in Africa, primarily in the DRC? And that Africa also has rich deposits of nickel and lithium. These are all key minerals in the production of lithium-ion batteries, which are used and found in most of our electronic devices, including smartphones, laptops, and electric vehicles. Did you know that over 95% of platinum and 39% of palladium is found in Africa, mostly in South Africa? And that these two metals are mainly used in the auto industry in the production of catalytic converters. And did you know that the future use of these metals is in hydrogen fuel cell technology, which will be used to produce fuel cell vehicles? But Africa exports most of its minerals as raw materials, only for other countries to refine it and manufacture high-value products like electric vehicles that will ultimately be sold back to Africa at ridiculous premiums. So the point of all this is, if Africa starts to refine its own minerals and manufacture batteries and fuel cells, Africa could quickly become Wakanda, and we could see more electric vehicles and fuel cell cars on African roads sooner than the rest of the world. It must be supported because it could fundamentally change the face of mobility in Africa. The electric mobility revolution, built for Africa, by Africa. Now, the electric mobility revolution, has already begun with Tesla leading it. Within 10 years, Tesla's market capitalization grew to over $690 million. That's more than the top 10 fossil fuel car manufacturers combined. And this is forcing all vehicle manufacturers to seriously consider going electric. Adding to the pressure, some countries have already announced when they are planning to ban the sale of fossil fuel cars, some as early as 2025. And the vehicle manufacturers are starting to respond too. Audi has just announced that it will stop the production of petrol and diesel cars by 2033. Now, I said I was born in 1990, so that makes me a millennial or from Generation Y. And this is a very interesting graphic that shows the different generations that we live and work with currently. It illustrates that because of our different global influences experienced in our respective time, the generations are all wired differently. For example, it explains why we have conflict at the workplace. The older generations, who are many of our bosses, use more controlling and directing leadership styles, while we, the younger generations, use and respond better to guiding and empowering leadership styles. In terms of mobility, iconic cars of the builders, baby boomers, and Gen X are all fossil fuel cars. For the millennials, it's a hybrid. Gen Z, it's a pure electric car. And for Gen Alpha, it will be an autonomous car. Each generation core values are also very different. Gen X are more skeptical, which is why there's generally some resistance to new and innovative ideas. Whereas millennials are more realistic, and Gen Z are more creative, and perhaps the reason why they have a willingness to always challenge the status quo with new and innovative ideas. In terms of mobility, as a millennial, I bought a vehicle for myself because it gave me a sense of purpose. But Gen Z are more pragmatic. They're beginning to question the need for car ownership. I believe that they will realize that the car spends most of its time parked, and it's expensive to own, maintain, and insure. They're more open to sharing and living in shared societies. I mean, most of them become comfortable with using Uber and other ride-sharing apps before they even learn how to drive. So this will be the generation that I believe will demand a better public transport system. And by when? This is a bit of a busy graphic, but in the center, it shows the workforce in terms of the generations. By 2030, the builders and baby boomers will all be retired. The workforce will start from Gen X, predominantly be millennials and Gen Z, and Gen Alpha will also start working. This is very important for us to always consider when we provide long-term solutions today for the generations that will use them tomorrow, especially when creating smart cities and smart mobility. So who is SANRAL exactly? SANRAL is the National Roads Authority of South Africa, and we are in charge of about 22,000 kilometers of road infrastructure. SANRAL's road network is made up of follows. Just under 86% of non-toll roads, which means that these roads are funded by government. Just over 8% of toll roads, which means that these roads are funded by the user pay principle. And just under 6% of concession toll roads, which are co-funded through our public-private partnerships. And we have 3 concessionaires, N3TC, Track, and Bakwena. Now, South Africa's total road network is made up of nearly 750,000 kilometers of roadway, which is currently recognized as the 10th largest road network in the world. So in perspective, the SANRAL road network makes up only a small percentage of this. However, the SANRAL road network is arguably the most important because it connects the country's major cities to each other and to the national ports. SANRAL is a roads infrastructure provider that builds, operates, and maintains the country's primary road network. The SANRAL road network serves to mobilize millions of vehicles carrying even more passengers and tons of freight every day around South Africa. And we do this by providing infrastructure in the form of multi-lane highways and interchanges. And here you can see an example of our infrastructure in use at the Mgeni interchange in Durban. So what does mobility mean? By simple definition, mobility is the ability to move freely. Therefore, on our roads, when traffic congestion starts to build up, mobility is inhibited. This further leads to time and fuel wastage for the road user and greatly increases the emissions in the area around the congestion. Traffic congestion occurs when there are more cars on the road than the road has capacity to carry. Now, when we have the problem of congestion, with too many cars on the road at one time, the solution as a roads authority is typically to add more lanes and build bigger and crazier interchanges. And these are usually very expensive projects that take a relatively long time to construct. And space is limited too. You see, roads have the ability to unlock development. But when the development occurs close to our road, national roads, and eventually densifies, we are usually left with very limited space to widen our roads and interchanges. And this is why proper planning is so important. But if we were to look at the problem again in more detail in this modern day, there are too many cars on the road with a low occupancy. And you see this all the time. When you're stuck in traffic and look around, they're mostly private cars on the road with typically just the driver in a vehicle that could easily seat up to 4 people comfortably. So I created this theoretical graph with the number of vehicles on a road on the y-axis and the vehicle occupancy on the x-axis. The graph tries to illustrate that for a certain number of vehicles with a low occupancy, we have many vehicles on the road. And with a high occupancy, we have fewer vehicles on the road. The road infrastructure has an optimum capacity, which when exceeded by too many vehicles on the road, it becomes congested. And when we experience congestion constantly, we generally must build more lanes on the road to increase the optimum capacity of the road in order to decrease the congestion. But this is not sustainable. This is another look at what my graph tried to explain. What does it take to move 1,000 people? 1 train, 15 buses, anywhere from 250 to 1,000 cars, depending on the occupancy. And here's what it looks like again in reality. So as I mentioned just now, adding more lanes to an existing national road costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, and there may be no space to do so. But what if we could reduce the number of vehicles on the existing roads by innovatively increasing the occupancy of the vehicles? We would be able to prolong the need to upgrade the existing roads for a much longer time. And this is exactly where smart mobility ideas like rapid public transport, carpooling, ride-sharing, ride-hailing services like Uber, and e-commerce services like Mr. D and Take-A-Lot are all winning. But what exactly is smart mobility? There's 2 definitions that I like, and the first one is from Deloitte: reducing congestion and fostering faster, greener, and cheaper transportation options. And the second one is from the Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport: smart mobility involves creating connected and integrated transport systems, which offer flexibility and efficiency. This connectivity and integration will cut across all modes of transport, forming a compact, integrated, and efficient transport system. Now, from these definitions, I've outlined what I believe to be the key elements of smart mobility. It needs to be affordable and meet the needs of all socioeconomic classes, especially in the African context. It needs to be integrated as a multimodal transport system. It needs to be connected to the internet through digital platforms. It needs to be sustainable, environmentally, economically, and from an infrastructure perspective. And its success will also mean it needs to be efficient and trustworthy by being on time and reliable. Now, what are some of the challenges that smart mobility needs to address? In terms of transport systems and operations, the biggest challenge would be to create that affordable, integrated, connected, safe, efficient, and trustworthy multimodal transport system, the future mobility ecosystem that provides seamless mobility for the traveler's entire journey from the first mile to the last. I've discussed the challenge of too many cars on the roads with a low occupancy, but I believe that the core challenge for developing countries would be to democratize mobility for everyone, to truly empower individuals in the mobility revolution. And I think achieving part of this vision is captured in a quote by Gustavo Petro, the mayor of Bogota in Colombia, who said, "A developed country is not a place where the poor have cars. It's where the rich use public transport." And what he means is, build an affordable, high quality, and efficient public transport system so good that even the rich will choose to use it. He does not mean build such a good public transport system that only the rich can afford. In terms of infrastructure, the challenge would be to provide mobility infrastructure for people and goods, not just passenger cars and goods vehicles. Therefore, it must include walkability and cyclability. The infrastructure must be sustainable. Challenges also include rapid urbanization with uncoordinated and poor land use and development that occurs along our road corridors. The success of smart, digitally connected mobility solutions will rely on narrowing the digital divide between the rich and the poor, a challenge that the infrastructure needs to also address. For logistics management, the biggest challenge is to decrease the reliance on road infrastructure as a primary mobility for goods. In the African and South African context, we also have other challenges that threaten the movement of goods on our roads. The recent unrest and targeted attacks on road logistics that included theft, looting, vandalism, and burning of trucks caused serious distress and uncertainty in the supply of food and fuel in KZN. I personally won't ever forget standing in line for 11 hours just to buy food for my family. The event brought to light not only the importance of the national road network as the lifeblood of the country, but also the risk of a heavy reliance on one mode of transport for logistics. And with our high unemployment rates, high poverty rates, and so many hungry people, like so much of Africa, this threat may not go away anytime soon. So something must be done. Now, in trying to think about smart mobility solutions to these problems, I looked to one of my mentors, Elon Musk. As the CEO and founder of the revolutionary companies Tesla and SpaceX, he uses the first principles thinking approach to problem solving. He says, don't just follow the trend. You boil things down to the most fundamental truths and then reason up from there. So I applied this thinking to SANRAL, and here's what I found. In a nutshell, this is a high-level picture of who SANRAL currently is. We build, operate, and maintain the national road network primarily for goods and passenger vehicles, but we are disconnected from our road users. We outsource law enforcement to other governmental departments and seemingly have no control with regards to private urban developments along our corridor. Questioning the fundamental truth. Is SANRAL just here to build roads? Or is our ultimate objective to grow the economy by efficiently mobilizing goods and people along our corridors? You see, there's a fundamental difference. If you're here just to build roads, then we are limited to the provision of a unimodal type of transport infrastructure for the mobility of road vehicles. However, if we are to embrace the ultimate objective of mobilizing goods instead of just goods vehicles and people instead of just passenger vehicles along our road corridor, we could connect more closely to our users and provide them with multimodal types of transport infrastructure. But what would that SANRAL look like? Here's a picture of what I think the future of SANRAL could be, providing connected and sustainable road infrastructure. Through stronger intergovernmental partnerships and partnerships with private sector, we could provide smarter, connected, and sustainable transport solutions for the mobility of along our corridors. Through partnerships with PRASA and Transnet, we could provide integrated road and rail infrastructure for the mobility of people and goods. Partnerships with the local municipalities could allow us to provide non-motorized transport or NMT infrastructure adjacent to our road network for the mobility of people. Municipal partnerships would also allow us to better plan and coordinate the land use and urban development along our corridors. Law enforcement partnerships could further allow us to have dedicated enforcement units on our road network, which will significantly enhance road safety, security, and operations on our roads. And this picture could be the future of not just SANRAL, but all other road agencies. So what did these and other opportunities presented by smart mobility actually look like? I've listed them here, but what I want to do is try and explain them using a picture. If SANRAL is here just to build roads, then all we do is get more vehicles on our roads. But what if we provide NMT infrastructure along our roads for people to walk, cycle, and use their personal mobility devices like electric scooters and electric skateboards? It will mean that people could have access to infrastructure that enables the cheapest form of mobility, or free in most cases. What about providing first and last mile infrastructure in the form of car parks at strategic nodes that will enable pickup and drop-off points for carpooling and using connected public transport, which strategically integrates the operation of buses and taxis? These first last mile nodes would also be connected to the NMT infrastructure for people to walk or cycle to and from. As mentioned, these nodes would also be strategically connected to a modern passenger rail that could flank our road network. This type of additional integrated mobility infrastructure will create opportunities for people to choose an alternate mode of transport other than road vehicles. This will mean fewer cars on the road, which increases the longevity and sustainability of road infrastructure for a much longer period of time. before an upgrade is required. Upgrading of the freight rail network and support of multimodal freight technology like the road railer concept could significantly alleviate the current stress of infrastructure for much longer. Again, this is something that we should look at. Better planning of land use and development alongside our roads would enable us to ensure that the future of mobility does not become spatially constrained. In terms of environmental sustainability, we could develop green corridor initiatives to reduce the emissions created along our corridors. For example, we could implement tree planting projects as part of the scope of NMT infrastructure. Trees will not only help with the emissions, but also provide natural shade and shelter for people that choose to walk or cycle. We could further promote or perhaps incentivize tree planting beyond our roads into private and public developments, perhaps up to 1 kilometer alongside the corridor, to boost the green effect and radically offset the emissions. Other green corridor initiatives, such as the support of renewable energy infrastructure and electric mobility, would make a positive impact on climate change. In reducing the digital divide through strategic partnerships with telecommunication companies, we should provide access to free Wi-Fi along our roads for the purpose of connecting mobility applications. And another way to reduce the digital divide is to create data-free apps so that users don't need to access data. And lastly, having a dedicated law enforcement unit would significantly enhance the safety and security of the smart mobility future. So in summary, while the future of smart mobility is exciting, it does require significant mind shifts from the way in which we currently do things. And I would like us to all hold on to the dream and vision of Wakanda as the blueprint when building the future of our African smart cities. Now, I know that I was probably preaching to the choir today, and that the road ahead for many of us who are passionate about smart mobility and smart cities may be full of challenges, naysayers, and those who say it is impossible. But as I come in for a landing, you remember that I'm a man of God, so I have a word of encouragement for you. Jesus said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. So don't give up. Thanks for listening, and God bless.
That preach, brother. Ladies and gentlemen, this is great, and I'm excited about the future where SANRAL is going. I look at SANRAL as a marketplace and an enabler and a provider of mobility, and not only mobility, but mobility of the future. Someone once asked Sasheen, what's the difference between transport and mobility? And I said, transportation is a mean, it's a means, but the mobility is the end, is to get you there safely, affordably, and sustainably so. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be joined by two of our panelists. I'm going to introduce them. Again, we have young people today, and it's unlike us people who are in our last mile of our journey on this earth. We're here with young people who are talking sustainability in ways that we probably never thought about. Our next speaker is a young lady by the name of Edem Foley, a program manager for Uyilo e-mobility program. I had the pleasure of meeting her 2 years ago down at Nelson Mandela University. She currently serves as a program manager for the National Uyilo program, a multi-stakeholder collaborative program initiated by Technology Innovation Agency, which is focusing on enabling, facilitating, mobilizing electric mobility in South Africa. Edem completed an MBA degree at Nelson Mandela University's Business School, where she developed an interest in entrepreneurship and management technology. She also holds a postgraduate diploma in management marketing and a Bachelor of Social Science degree from the University of Cape Town. Edem has also 15 years of experience in various business development roles within the private sector and NGOs. In her spare time, she enjoys participating in social impact initiatives involving women and youth, yes, in this Women's Month. Idim, just in a minute, just greet and tell us about yourself and who you are. Let the people know who you are.
Okay, thanks so much, Victor, for that lovely introduction, and also to Sasheen for a great presentation earlier on. Yes, I am the program manager for the Uyilo e-mobility program. I am based at their facilities, which are housed at Nelson Mandela University in Gqeberha. And our program was initiated by the Technology Innovation Agency, focused on enabling, facilitating, and mobilizing the uptake of e-mobility in South Africa. And our activities are really focused on looking at pilot projects, skills development, thought leadership, enterprise development, and also looking at creation of different business models related to electric mobility, and also innovative models as well related to electric mobility. And I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is a young man, another young man by the name of Kevin Mutia, professional officer in the Urban Systems Unit at ICLEI Africa. Kevin is a professional officer at ICLEI Africa in Urban Systems Unit. He merges his experience and background in landscape architecture, urban planning, urban design to influence the transformation of urban forms in African cities. This is through urban research, analysis, interpreting urban data, whilst following design processes in development of urban plans, frameworks, strategies to improve the quality of urban spaces in Africa. In essence, smart cities. Kevin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks so much, Victor, and thanks so much to Eden and Sasheen for that great presentation and introduction. My name is Kevin Mutia, a professional officer in Urban Systems Unit from ICLEI Africa. And ICLEI is a global membership organization that's made up of 1,700 and over local governments and regional governments who are committed to sustainable urban development. And ICLEI Africa has three main actions, which is accelerating change, promoting gateways to solutions, and also accelerating actions by bringing city leaders together. And ICLEI sees urban mobility as an urban resource network that can be leveraged within smart cities to be able to serve as local government catalysts. And I'm very happy to be here and very interested in understanding urban mobility in African cities and how we can contextualize the idea of the smart city in Africa. Thanks, Victor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's bring all our speakers so that everybody, our audience can see everybody. I'd like us to frame our discussion in the next 20 minutes that is left in this discussion. We spoke about sustainability, which is smart mobility. I know sustainability is a triple bottom line, which is environmental, environmental or ecological, economic and social sustainability. We know in Africa, the biggest killer, particularly in provinces like us here in Johannesburg and Gauteng, urbanization, rapid urbanization, is putting a huge strain on our transport system and mobility, and where we need social sustainability, that becomes an issue. However, SANRAL, coming back to you, Sasheen, when we talk of economic sustainability of all our transport system, we know you have a user pay principle, but not all your roads are tolled. You rely on the fuel tax to fund the majority of your road infrastructure. But over the years, there's a graph that I like that SANRAL always puts in, where it shows the increase in the number of vehicles, but then the flattening of the fuel tax, which has a lot to do with vehicle efficiency, where it's using less fuel. How do you see SANRAL becoming sustainable in the next 10 years? I don't want to even put the issue of COVID into the discussion, but how do you see SANRAL being sustainable into the future, given the fact that particularly with the whole concept of user pay principle and the fact that heavy vehicles are probably putting more strain on your maintenance budget, and I'm not so sure even that they are paying a fair share of what they're doing. How is that affecting the whole sustainability of SANRAL to collect money and to be able to maintain the existing infrastructure and also even build more infrastructure? Sasheen?
Thanks, Victor. Great question. So our current strategy, Horizon 2030, it's exploring opportunities to diversify our funding portfolio. Up until we had a change of leadership, we relied on the two funding portfolios, which is toll roads and non-toll roads. But now we have created a business development unit that are going to explore other avenues of generating alternate road funding so that we can maintain and continue to grow our infrastructure. So that's quite exciting for the company as well.
Wow, awesome. Edim, let's come back. Let's get back to you. I went down to Nelson Mandela and I saw the jewel. You know, we always speak about the South Africa's first electric vehicle that was built, and it never took off for whatever reason. Was it ahead of its time? That's one question that I'd like to ask you. But then again, there's a school of thought that South Africa is better off without electric vehicles because of the jobs, particularly in the fuel value chain, the number of jobs that could be culled because of this. Where does ILO stand on these matters? You might also comment on the Joule as well.
Okay, with the Joule, it was unfortunately ahead of its time. And the reason why the project fell through was a lack of investment, because people, it wasn't something that was believed upon at that time. So it's just a matter of being at the right place at the right time. So that was the unfortunate aspect of the Joule. In terms of South Africa and its transition to electric vehicles, there's a lot of statistics and reports out at the moment. A particular one to highlight is with the International Labour Organization, where about 2.5 million net jobs can be created from the transition to the electrification of transport around the world. And that amount of jobs can be doubled to about 4.5 million if investment in public transport infrastructure is doubled. And when it comes to the fear of the loss of jobs of the fuel chain or the fuel value chain in South Africa, we need to look at a just transition. So the people who are already within the automotive industry, they would need to be reskilled and retrained. And those youngsters or the youth who are coming in to the automotive industry, they need to be trained in electric vehicle related technologies, such as battery related technologies, energy storage related technologies, also electric vehicles and infrastructure related technologies, and high voltage technology training as well. So if a skills development framework is put into place, and I believe discussions have started along that already, then we could look at the transition in a just way so that no one within that sector is left behind and they have an opportunity to still be part of the workforce during the transition to electric vehicles.
Thank you. That's actually a very great insight. Yeah, Kevin, it is said that cities provide up to 30% of their open spaces just for vehicles. Okay, we're not talking about office space and everything, just for vehicles, the road, parking, and I believe also every vehicle has got probably about 8 parking spaces. Parking at home, parking at work, parking at the shopping mall, parking everywhere. Yet this asset lies idle for up to 95% of the time. And when it moves, it only moves with 1.2 persons in it. Where is the logic from that? From an urban point of view, from an urban planning point of view, from a smart city point of view, what is the solution?
That's a very interesting question, Victor, and rightly so. If we look at how we use our transport systems and our transport spaces, a lot of times it can go to waste. And I think this happens because we adopt a lot of planning standards, I think, from the West, where they had already had a lot of mobilization in their time. And bringing that to Africa, where the urban population and the urban growth rates are quite different, we need to be very critical about how we adjust planning standards in this context. So, for instance, say in North America, where you have parking spaces in malls that are ridiculous, and we keep on importing the same kind of standards when we create our mall systems here. So, we need to really question, are we actually using the same kind of standards, or should we come up with more innovative solutions? I also point to informal settlements, where which are very specific to different developing contexts. And when we think about mobility systems in informal settlements, are we using the same kind of vehicles? Are we using the same kind of trucks for waste disposal in informal settlements, or do we want to rethink the tools and the materials and the vehicles that we innovate in our particular contexts? So back to your question about I want to call it insanity of parking and how we look at our transport systems in this context. We really have to be critical and have to think very differently about how we relate with mobility and vehicles in this context. Something that I'm baffled by is, with our current growth rates, we still keep on prioritizing a private individual in a private vehicle. And I think, as Sasheen mentioned earlier on, we need to be very conscious around who's using our public transport systems, who are using our road systems. Is it a mass population? Is it an individual? We see one person in a car going to work every day. And I always question that. I'm like, where do we have integrated mobility routes? So can we have tram systems in between roads? Can we have non-motorized transport systems in between roads or on the sides to allow for different kinds of mobility systems?
Wow. Thanks, Kevin. Now I'm going to go around again, but this time I'm going to go with the same question for all of you. Okay. When we talk Africa and smart cities, people who are saying there can be no smart city in Africa. I know the president was lambasted 2 years ago when he spoke about smart cities. There are two concepts that come to mind for me. It's inclusivity and affordability, because these are big issues when it comes to mobility. Mobility tends to be perpetuate class discrimination. From you, Sasheen, how, from a SANRAL point of view, okay, how would SANRAL play a role in making sure that your roads are affordable to a man in the street? I mean, if I'm driving my Range Rover, I pay the same amount of money when I come to a SANRAL toll gate than if I'm driving my 1972 Datsun. Of course, you guys don't know what a Datsun is. Okay. Yeah. So how could we make our roads more inclusive, given the fact that also SANRAL is a marketplace? SANRAL is about the economy engine of this country. We saw what happened when we had riots, when N3 was shut down. I mean, SANRAL plays that role. But how can SANRAL play that role even better to make sure that even the people that have access to economic opportunities, and making it even more inclusive of everybody? Over to you, Sasheen.
Thanks, Victor. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, the ideas around smart mobility we must build affordable and inclusive infrastructure that gives people access to a wide variety of choices of mobility. The concept of moving away from just providing infrastructure for road vehicles to providing infrastructure for the mobility of people is a mindset. For example, with NMT infrastructure, we usually provide them as a means to get people off our road. But this thinking now is to say we want to provide NMT infrastructure as an alternative mobility for people to choose, so they don't have to use their cars. And what does it mean in the African context? It means that you give people access to walking and cycling with safe infrastructure that is a cheap form of mobility. I think I've heard before that the low-income earners spend up to 50% of their income just on transport alone. They'll probably spend another 20 and 30% on food for the day. So they have very little at the end of the day to live. They literally work to live. They don't live to work. So if they're able to get a bicycle and cycle to work, instead of pay money for jumping onto public transport or whatever they use, then we could see them improve themselves economically, socially. So I do believe that providing alternate infrastructure will help emancipate a lot of the low-income earners. You talked about how do we address the inclusivity on the road, and you gave an example of I think it was a Datsun and a Range Rover. So what's interesting with them is I think fuel efficiency is what we're touching on now. Over the years, vehicle manufacturers have done everything they can to improve the fuel efficiency of their cars. We've seen smaller engines with turbochargers, things like stop-start technology and other innovative technologies being used in the cars. So if you have one of these modern-day cars, you're probably going to pay less for fuel, and your costs are going to be a little bit less. But if you have an older car, and I think we must be cognizant that Africa and South Africa does have an older vehicle fleet that the poor usually end up buying. These are not so fuel efficient, so they end up paying more in the long run. And this is the type of things, realities, fundamental truths that we have to come together and discuss. How are we going to change it? It's not just about buying a car. It's about fuel efficiency and the different socioeconomic classes that have access to that. So that's what I think.
Yeah. Thank you. Here's another question for you, Idim. There's another question from the audience. Bjorn, thank you for the question. He's asking, looking into the future, when the industry is shifting, electric vehicle model requiring reskilling, are we considering that the education system needs a facelift and that the service attendant, which is your petrol attendant today, has a job security of tomorrow? I think you tried to answer this question before, but put that in the back of your mind with your responses. But also come back to the issue of inclusivity and affordability. The fact that if companies are going to build charging infrastructure, I don't think they're going to prioritize the townships and the peri-urban and the rural areas. In fact, the current charging infrastructure, they are all in your upmarket places, which cuts out the other people from even getting in there. And also the fact that from an affordability point of view, electric vehicles, the total cost of ownership at the moment is still like 30% more than the vehicle. How do you believe Uyilo is going to overcome these obstacles? Also looking at the issue of reskilling, the question from Bjorn. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Victor. That's a really, really great question. What we are looking at the moment is some of our programs activities are towards creating technology solutions and innovative business models to allow for the uptake of electric mobility. So on the first point of affordability, when you look at for example, let's take public transport, because not most people in the country can afford to purchase their own car, regardless of whether it's an EV or a fuel-based car. So when you look at the total cost of ownerships of a diesel bus versus a battery electric vehicle bus, the total cost of ownership and the total maintenance and operating costs, that's the most important thing. Maintenance and operating costs are much lower than that of diesel buses. So possibly a way to look at it is to pass on those savings onto the commuter so that the commuter pays less for public transport at the end of the day. Then another option is to look at micro-mobility options. Sasheen did touch on it earlier. Electric scooters are part of micro-mobility, electric bicycles, and also electric three-wheelers are all part of micro-mobility. And they're affordable options of getting around, particularly for first and last mile traveling. And also, in terms of infrastructure for those type of vehicles, you don't need charging stations. You can charge them through using the existing electricity infrastructure, which is your normal wall socket. So those are the kind of things that we could look at, and possibly also looking at the mind shift when it comes to mobility options. So it's not just about owning a vehicle. It's also using multiple modes of transport to get around, and also car sharing as well to help reduce the expenses related to car ownership. And in terms of reskilling, I personally have actually written a paper which looks at how to accelerate the lithium-ion battery manufacturing value chain in the SADC region. I can send a link to people who are interested in it. And in that paper, there's actually a framework of how to ensure that that no one is left behind in terms of reskilling. And I also talk about starting at the bottom in terms of school and the education system, and encouraging people to take subjects such as mathematics and physical sciences right up to grade 12, and not stop taking them in junior school and primary school. Unfortunately, this is the only way to sustain the pipeline or to lay a foundation for skilling people. And in terms of reskilling people and in terms of job security, there are learnerships within the various educational training authorities called SETAs, which can provide the people who own the petrol stations with the means to retrain their attendants at affordable rates, provided that those petrol stations pay their skills development levies. I mean, I could go on forever, but that's it in a nutshell. If viewers want to chat to me more, I think my contact details are available on the platform.
Sorry, Victor, I think you're muted.
This is what happens when you share you in a Zoom call with older people. They speak muted. Kevin, in a minute, no one left behind, inclusivity and affordability. What's your take on these two concepts?
That's a very interesting question. And thanks so much, Sasheen and Eden, for laying the foundation. The way I see it, I think it's got multiple levels. So the first one, I think, is a multi-governmental and multi-sectoral approach where different levels of government and different sectors come together to prioritize infrastructure projects so that they can have a shared budget and have a shared vision. I think that lowers the cost. And then the second aspect is getting the private sector involved in some sort of land value capture system, whereby you have tax breaks and incentives to people who develop along transit-oriented development corridors, which makes it easier for them to contribute to paying for things like non-motorized transport, walkways, bus stops, and things like that. And then I think the last one is about, when I think about inclusivity and cost I think it's about moving people from point A to point B. So what innovative measures can we put from a planning perspective to develop mixed use development areas and mixed income neighborhoods where you have different people from different social economic groups. So not everybody has to drive, some people can walk. So I think the way I see it in a nutshell is cost and inclusivity can be made possible where people can be able to go to where they work so that people have more choice.
Kevin,
Thanks, Victor.
Thank you so much. Sasheen, Idim, and our team at the back, Lindiwe and Tarin, thank you so much, guys. And just in closing from me, the road to smart mobility is going to be a long and an arduous one, particularly for Africa. Look, countries globally, they're still battling with this. I mean, you go to Michigan, they've got potholes in Michigan. The nice thing I said, Sasheen, they've got potholes on the highway in Michigan. But be that as it may, I believe it is a vision for everybody, for every city, whoever, and you guys are doing a great job on the area of smart mobility. I believe that in future mobility will be connected, particularly when we start using more and more of shared mobility, and it will be sustainable, and it will be a mobility that leaves no one behind, like Idim said. And Sasheen, great work you guys are doing at SANRAL. And Kevin, thank you so much. I believe the planners of the future have their work cut out. And to the team and everybody else and the think tank and the audience, I thank you very much and God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.